a neuroscientist at McMaster University, discovered something disturbing about powerful people. He hooked CEOs and executives up to brain scanners and measured what happened when they looked at subordinates. What he found explains every moment you've ever felt invisible. They're mirror neurons, the parts of the brain that allow humans to empathize, to connect, to see each other, were almost completely shut off. Power hadn't made them cold. Power had made them neurologically blind. This is not a metaphor. This is peer-reviewed neurology. When Professor Obi measured motor cortical activity, he found a stark asymmetry. Power holders exhibited remarkably low activity. Their brains were barely processing the humans in front of them. Meanwhile, powerless individuals showed highly active motor cortexes. They were paying attention. They were attuning. They were doing what humans are supposed to do. But here's where it gets darker. Adam Galinsky ran an experiment where he asked people to draw the letter E on their foreheads. Simple task. But people who had been primed to feel powerful drew the E backwards, the way it would look to themselves, not to an observer. They physically could not take another person's perspective. Their brains had been hijacked by status, and this explains something you've felt but could never name. Every networking event where you felt like furniture. Every meeting where your ideas evaporated into silence. Every handshake that went nowhere. You weren't failing. You were registering as invisible to brains that had been biologically redesigned to overlook you. The paradox is brutal. The very people you need to impress have neural architecture specifically configured to not process you as a human being worthy of attention. You've been trying to be noticed by people whose brains are designed not to notice. So what do you do when the person you need to impress has a brain that is biologically wired to overlook you? 500 years ago, a man solved this exact problem. Machiavelli spent 14 years as a diplomat in Renaissance Italy, observing the mechanics of power at the closest possible range. He watched how princes rose and fell. He studied why some advisors became indispensable while others were discarded. And he documented 13 laws, not for gaining power, but for connecting with those who already have it. But before we get to those laws, you need to understand why everything you've tried before has failed. You were told the game was about competence. Work harder. Get better credentials. Deliver more value. You did all of it. You stayed late. You crushed your targets. You became the person everyone relied on. And yet somehow, less talented people with worse ideas kept getting promoted, funded, and invited into rooms you couldn't access. This wasn't your imagination. This wasn't bad luck. The game was rigged, but not the way conspiracy theorists claim. It's rigged by biology. When someone gains power, their brain undergoes measurable changes. The behavioral inhibition system, the part responsible for threat avoidance and careful deliberation, gets suppressed. The behavioral activation system, reward-seeking, goal attainment, takes over completely. This makes them worse at perspective-taking. Studies show they perceive lower-status individuals as physically shorter than they actually are, a literal distortion of reality. And here's the cruelest irony. Research calls it the power paradox. The very traits that help people rise, empathy, attunement, collaboration, atrophy once they achieve status. The person you're trying to reach is no longer the person who earned their position. They've been neurologically transformed by the throne. There's a 49-year-old man in the comments section of videos like this who wrote something that stopped me cold. He said, "I spent my entire 30s thinking that if I just showed my boss how smart I was, he would promote me. Decades. Playing a game that was designed for him to lose. The villain is not any individual powerful person. The villain is the invisible architecture of status itself, a system that rewards those who understand its rules while crushing those who believe in meritocracy. The rules exist. They've been documented. They've been validated by neuroscience, sociology, and 500 years of political observation. But they're never taught in schools, MBA programs, or career workshops. Why? Because the people at the top benefit from your ignorance. Your belief in meritocracy makes you predictable, manageable, and non-threatening. It keeps you playing by rules that were designed for you to lose. So if working harder doesn't work, and being smarter doesn't work, and being more visible doesn't work, what does? The answer requires understanding why every strategy you've tried has failed. Let's start with the most common one, the shine brighter strategy. You were taught that excellence gets rewarded. So you delivered exceptional results. You made your boss look good, until you made them look too good, until people started noticing you instead of them. Michael Eisner at Disney became notorious for exactly this dynamic. Jeffrey Katzenberg built the Disney animation renaissance, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King. He was one of the most talented executives in Hollywood. And he was discarded. Not for incompetence, for brilliance. His shine triggered Eisner's threat detection circuitry. The one brain system that still works in powerful people works overtime. And that system has one response: eliminate. This is Machiavelli's first law. Never outshine the master. When you walk into that room radiating capability, you are not triggering respect, you are triggering the most primal part of their brain, the part that perceives you as a threat to be neutralized. Then there's the second failed strategy. Be valuable. Be helpful. You decided to anticipate needs. To be the person who always says yes, always delivers, always sacrifices. Surely, gratitude and loyalty would follow. Wrong. Research from the University of Florida shows that CEOs who score higher on Machiavellianism are more successful in negotiations precisely because they treat every interaction as a transaction, not a favor bank. They don't feel grateful. They feel entitled. When you appeal to mercy, you create cognitive burden. You're asking them to process you as an individual worthy of reciprocity. But their mirror neurons are suppressed. They physically cannot feel what you think they should feel. Your helpful positioning just makes you furniture that's easy to take for granted. Now I'm going to pause here and show you something that might change how you see your entire career. Ronald Burt, a sociologist at the University of Chicago, studied 673 managers at a Fortune 500 company. He measured their positions in the company's social network, specifically, how many structural holes they bridged. A structural hole is a gap between two groups that don't talk to each other. What he found was mathematical proof of what actually works. Managers who bridged these holes, who were the only connection between islands of information, were paid more, promoted faster, and rated higher by their superiors. Not because they were the most talented, not because they worked the hardest, not because they were the most helpful, because they controlled the flow. They weren't just employees. They were intelligence agencies. The data is overwhelming. You don't need to be the smartest person in the room. You need to be the person who knows what's happening in every room. All conventional approaches fail for the same reason. They assume powerful people operate on the same psychological frequency as everyone else. They don't. Their brains have been rewired by status. The only strategies that work are those designed to bypass neurological blindness and speak directly to their reward-seeking circuitry. So what do powerful people actually crave? What penetrates the fog of their suppressed empathy? Every powerful person walks around with 3 psychological voids. Understand these voids, and the 13 laws stop being abstract philosophy. They become surgical instruments. The first is the existential void. Higgins' self-discrepancy theory describes the gap between who powerful people are and who they believe they should be. For a CEO, this might be the gap between ruthless operator and visionary leader. For a politician, between power-hungry and public servant. This gap creates constant anxiety. They are always managing it. And if you can position yourself as the person who confirms their ideal self, who treats them as the visionary, the mentor, the iconoclast they desperately want to be, you fill a void no one else is filling. You become psychologically necessary. This is why mirroring works. When you reflect their ideal self back at them, you become addictive. Their brains are starving for validation that their own suppressed mirror neurons cannot generate. The second void is the information void. Powerful people are isolated. Their yes men feed them filtered reality. They're surrounded by people who tell them what they want to hear, because those people fear the consequences of honesty. This creates dangerous blindness. They cannot see what's actually happening in their organization, their market, or their social circle. If you become the source of unfiltered intelligence, you fill a void no one else can fill. This is why Burt's structural holes research matters so much. The person who bridges information gaps becomes indispensable, not because they're loyal, but because they're irreplaceable. Key tactical insight: never reveal all your sources. If they can get the information without you, you become replaceable. You become a piece that can be discarded. The third void is the vertigo void. The French call it l'appel du vide, the call of the void. It's that unexplained urge you feel when standing at a high place to jump. Clinically, it's the brain's miscommunication between recognizing danger and an impulse to act on it. Everyone near power feels this vertigo. The intoxication, the instability, the fear of falling. Closeness to status is a high place, seductive and terrifying simultaneously. If you can be the one unmovable, steady presence, the person who doesn't flinch, doesn't grovel, doesn't visibly want anything, you become the anchor they cling to. This is why the willingness to walk away holds all the leverage. The person who needs nothing cannot be controlled. Research confirms the scale of this isolation. Leaders report 50% loneliness rates, with 61% believing isolation directly impacts their performance. In this environment, someone who fills even one void becomes magnetic. Someone who fills all three becomes unforgettable. Each of Machiavelli's 13 laws is a tool for filling one or more of these voids. Laws addressing the existential void teach you to mirror, to enable fantasy, to never outshine. Laws addressing the information void teach you to conceal intent, become the gatekeeper, control options. Laws addressing the vertigo void teach you strategic absence, emotional alchemy, radical autonomy. The framework is complete. You now understand the voids. You understand the laws. But there's one question left, the one everyone's afraid to ask. What does this cost? Tomorrow, you can begin. Here's how. Step 1. Map the structural holes. Before your next interaction with someone powerful, ask yourself what information they need that they're not getting. Who are the two groups in their world that don't communicate? Position yourself at that intersection. Step 2. Identify their ideal self. What role do they wish they played? The mentor? The visionary? The rebel? Design your interactions to cast them in that role. Not through flattery, that triggers suspicion. Through behavior. Become the eager student, the fellow visionary, the loyal lieutenant. Step 3. Cultivate walk-away power. Before you enter any room, ask yourself what happens if this goes badly. What is your alternative? If you have no alternative, you have no leverage. Develop your exit strategy before you need it. But I will not lie to you. There is a cost to this game. Psychological research has found that those who practice Machiavellianism long-term develop something called alexithymia, the clinical inability to identify or describe their own emotions. Their inner world becomes emotionally vacant. They win the game but cannot feel the victory. They gain the world, but lose access to their own soul. Studies show elevated rates of anxiety, depression, and an inability to form genuine relationships. They view partners as objects to exploit rather than humans to connect with. The mask fuses to the face. This is the paradox. These laws are keys, but every key opens a door that closes another. The research on Machiavellian CEOs shows they earn more, negotiate better, and climb faster. Jeffrey Pfeffer at Stanford documented that power skills are learnable, and that choosing not to pursue them leaves you vulnerable to those who will. But here's what nobody tells you. The people at the top using these tactics are often the most isolated, the most anxious, and the most trapped. Power is a gilded cage. Use these laws surgically. Use them strategically. Use them to survive in a world that was not designed for your success. But do not let them become who you are. The master plays the game. The fool becomes it. You've been trying to be seen by people whose brains cannot see you. Now you understand the game. The question is, knowing the cost, are you willing to play it? Because once you step through this door, you cannot unsee what you've learned. The world will look different. People will look different. You will see the invisible architecture of status that 99% of people never perceive. And you will have a choice that most never get to make. There are players, and there are pieces. The pieces never learned the rules. Now you have. What you do with that knowledge is no longer about capability. It's about character.